Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's CARIMAC Research Seminar Series. This session is held every Wednesday, and the seminars have really become a staple research activity for us here at CARIMAC. The sessions are intended to provide researchers with an opportunity to share our research projects and our research strategies. Training on the various aspects of the research process is also part of our scope of activities. We at CARIMAC aim to foster a thriving research environment for staff and students, especially our MPhil PhD candidates. Through this initiative, we also aim to build stronger research relationships with our colleagues in academia and, of course, in industry. Again, a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for being part of the CARIMAC Research Seminar, and we hope to continue collaborating with you in the near future as we realize our goals. Our presenter for this afternoon is Dr. Neleen Leslie Piper, adjunct lecturer here at CARIMAC. I now invite Kerry K. Bennett to introduce Dr. Leslie Piper. Immediately following her introduction, Dr. Piper will begin. Over to you, Ms. Bennett.
Thank you. Pleasant afternoon, everyone. My name is Kerry K. Bennett, and I am pleased to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Neleen Leslie Piper is an integrated marketing communications practitioner and scholar with over a decade of experience in branding and marketing communications. She currently serves as program director for graduate studies in the School of Advanced Management, as well as lecturer of marketing in the School of Business Administration at the University of Technology, Jamaica. She is also an adjunct senior lecturer in the Caribbean School of Media and Communication, CARIMAC, at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Dr. Leslie Piper is an alumnus of Florida State University, where she earned her PhD in mass communication and master's degrees in measurement and statistics and integrated marketing and management communication. She earned her undergraduate degree in marketing and international business at the University of Technology, Jamaica. Dr. Leslie Piper's experience spans multiple industries and countries, from brand management in Jamaican distribution and pharmaceutical industries to communication strategy, advocacy, and nonprofit management in American higher education. Her research interests include branding, advertising, multicultural marketing, and intercultural communication. Her recent works focus on how elements of national culture impact consumer attitudes and behavior. Please help me welcome Dr. Neleen Leslie Piper.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bennett, for that introduction. And thank you so much for the invitation to present my research. I am looking forward to sharing this topic. Multicultural marketing is one of my pet areas that I started to work in while I was studying in the US. And even though I've been teaching exclusively in Jamaica for the past 7 years, I still try to stay active in this particular area because I believe that it is of importance, not just within the US context, but as marketing and IMC educators that are training professionals for the industry. And so I think this particular topic is timely. One of the things that I have been looking at over the years, even from the time that I was studying in the States, was how rare multicultural education was within marketing education or even IMC education in higher ed as a whole. When we have the conversation about multicultural education, it tends to happen in discussing pedagogy when it relates to high schools, middle schools, etc. But in the higher education context, we don't see it a lot. And certainly when we start discussing how we prepare the next generation of communications professionals or marketing professionals, we tend not to have a robust discussion about it. And so this is what inspired this particular study. So what I will do in today's discussion is discuss a little bit of the current context. I'll talk a little bit about the industry, advertising industry, and also I will discuss the educational context. This study would have had me look at advertising and controversies that have happened. We have all been witness to some of the issues that brands have gotten themselves into over the years with recent campaigns, whether they are depictions or the rhetoric surrounding those campaigns that would have caused some issues. But I took it a step further and I also looked at the educational context. And so I tried to take a look at undergraduate and graduate programming being offered in IMC specifically, to look at where we are in terms of delivering diversity in terms of content, given that at the end of the day, if we are training the professionals who are doing the work, shouldn't their education reflect the groups that they are going to be charged with communicating with and delivering results for the brands? And I'll also draw on some work that has been done in education to discuss a way forward in terms of IMC education. So in terms of the context, I think we have all, as Jamaicans, kind of known that the US has been powered largely by the work of minorities. However, it was a wake-up call for most organizations in the US and the US population as a whole, when in the 2010 census, it was found that minorities actually accounted for most of the growth in the US population. And it has basically spawned a number of consequences. One of those consequences being that more and more businesses have started to pay attention to multicultural populations and starting to think about the dollars that these groups represent in terms of profits and being viable target audiences. Now, in terms of the estimates from the Census Bureau, we're seeing where between 2010, so if 2010 was frightening for Americans and also a wake-up call for businesses, the 2020 census was even bigger, because what they found was that all of the growth in the US population between 2010 and 2019 was accounted to minorities. So in terms of what has been happening, you have seen where there has been this growth in the minority populations, and so the proportion of the white population is shrinking just in relation. And so there are estimates that project that the US will be a minority majority by 2045, where all the minority groups combined will now constitute the majority of the US population. And one of the things that communication scholars tend to talk about is how that rhetoric around the minority majority has had so many consequences. Persons will look at it and trace it back to some of the anti-immigrant rhetoric that we have seen in the political space, and quite a bit of the fears of lawmakers who are concerned about losing the majority white base that they could rely upon to give them power and to maintain those structures that have traditionally been oppressive to minority populations. And so we hear a lot about it, and we have seen it unfold in so many different areas. And so communication scholars have traditionally focused on those topics, even in the intercultural communication space. So it's not that scholars aren't looking at it, but certainly that is the side of things that we have seen more work being done in. Now, what I try to do, and I'm hoping that this, I have a much bigger screen, and I'm hoping that this is somewhat visible. This is from the 2020 census, because the Census Bureau has now started publishing the results from the 2020 census. And what we're seeing here is that even though in most states in the US, which is the column to the left, all the oranges that you're seeing would imply a white alone majority in those states. So the states that have traditionally been minority, majority. So for example, California, New Mexico, and Puerto Rico are primarily Hispanic. The District of Columbia, which is technically not a state, has been primarily Black or African American, and we also have Hawaii, which again is Polynesian, Asian, Pacific Islander grouping. So these groups have traditionally been that way, and we have seen where the non-Hispanic white population remains majority in the states that they held those majorities. However, when you take a look at the column where you know the middle column here, where you have the second largest racial or ethnic group, what has been concerning to, as I said, policymakers and interesting to business is the growth in the other ethnic groups as the second largest or third largest population. And in quite a few of these states, in majority of these states, you're talking about second largest population being over 30%, inching towards 40% of the population in that group. And when you look at third largest again, you are seeing where, again, the growth in those groups, you're seeing no orange columns here, few orange columns here. So those are not the groups that are growing. And so what this context is what the context that I'm trying to establish here is that the reality of increased diversity, increased multicultural population, it is going to be a reality. We are seeing it happen before our very eyes. This map here is looking at race or ethnicity by county. And as you can see, these are the strongholds that I would have alluded to in the numbers. And again, looking at the second most prevalent groups, this is what can tell you which groups are rising, where they are rising, and the fact that in most of the country, you're having minority groups being second largest, and those groups are the groups that are really growing. So for example, between 2010 and 2020, I don't have the specific numbers, but even in the previous census, Hispanics accounted for more than half of the growth in the overall population as a whole. So imagine these areas now with the greens are growing at a much faster rate in terms of these populations than the white population is growing. In fact, the white population is not growing, it's shrinking, as I would have established before. This Brookings Institute map I find to be a little, probably less complex in terms of the different colors, and so you can see it a little bit more clearly what I'm referring to here. And so in the southern, and we're talking mostly like Georgia, states like Georgia, etc., is in terms of minority groups, highly represented. We have African Americans, and then here, Hispanics being highly represented as well. The Census Bureau has recently started tracking diversity information and is now producing information on states that have the highest diversity index. And this information here would be from the 2020 census that shows states with the highest diversity in indices, and also which states are experiencing the highest levels of growth. And something to note here is, look at these states that are experiencing highest percentage point differences, right? In some instances, like in the instance in looking at, for example, Maryland, right? these aren't states that were traditionally considered the most diverse. And this speaks to one of the trends that has been noted. We could normally rely on states like Florida, New York, New Jersey, Texas, California to be very diverse and be the most diverse states. However, what has been happening is that there has been dispersion of the multicultural population. And so while before people used to think, oh, these populations are really confined to some of those big cosmopolitan states that are, in terms of borders, are close geographically to certain areas, that's no longer the case. We have been seeing where there has been spread, there has been growth. And so multiculturalism, multicultural marketing and advertising cannot be confined to a specific region or area, really, because it is becoming more and more of a national phenomenon as the numbers are presenting. Now, I want to introduce here the concept of the multicultural marketplace, which is defined by Demango et al. As a place-centered environment, whether physical or virtual, where marketers, consumers, brands, ideologies, and institutions of multiple cultures converge at one point of concurrent interaction, while also being potentially connected to multiple cultures in other localities. And one of the perceptions has been for a very long time, the multicultural marketplace being the global market space. And when persons talk about global marketing, in fact, when you say multicultural marketing to some persons, they instantly begin to think international marketing, global marketing. They don't think about the multicultural marketplace within national borders or in a domestic context. Now, this, of course, impacts, yes, global marketing, and for us as educators of marketing professionals who are working with, global brands, when they have to develop strategy for export and to position their products and brands, a lot of times the approach that is taken is this national culture approach, which creates an issue because it really overlooks diversity within culture. And within a country like the United States, with a population of over 300 million, you are talking about trillions of dollars being represented in a group that would be considered minority, however, is large enough to be considered important. And of course, their buying power is significant. And so we cannot really ignore them. However, the truth is, it's not just a multicultural or a global marketing issue where persons who are marketing to persons in other countries have to consider this. This is also an issue within the United States when it comes to marketing and advertising. In fact, when we look at the history of advertising to minorities in the United States, you can divide the timeline into about 4 eras. You have the traditional eras, and so in the traditional era, you would not market to ethnic minorities at all. They would consume, but they would never see advertising messages directed to them. Then we transitioned into the separated era where minorities, in terms of advertising, it was limited, and what used to be advertised to minorities were products of inferior quality. Then we moved to the integrated era. And in the integrated era now, we started to see where companies began to realize that, okay, so wait, these groups have some money, we could actually profitably target them. But what happened was almost an approach that did not prioritize understanding these groups. So we relied very heavily on stereotypes and portrayals that were wildly inaccurate or unrealistic. And that was the perception among the groups being targeted. we are now in this multicultural era, which is driven, as I would have mentioned before, by the size and the increased buying power of these groups. And so they are now in a position to demand more fair and realistic representations of themselves in media. And not just that, but while there was a point in time where being a minority was undesirable, now having multiple cultures as a part of your identity and your background is actually something that is celebrated. And so with that cultural and social shift, we are seeing where more persons are demanding that those identities be represented in advertising. And during my research, I found, I tried to develop a little bit of a timeline in terms of when we talk about advertising that is offensive, stereotypical, or even downright racist, we could look back from as far as Aunt Jemima, which we now know that product, they're going to change their name. They have changed the name of this particular product. And if you even look at how this product was being marketed back then, you notice the language, the portrayal, and always we would see these stereotypical portrayals of persons of color in positions of servitude. Or even you look at, Frito Bandido, who is, the product now as Fritos, but this is the same product, who pretty much, it was the mascot or personification of the brand was really this lazy Hispanic guy who would, grin his teeth and be on the roadside and, would steal. If you look at it, wanted for theft, he has stolen corn chips, right? And it would play into the same perception that that of Hispanic and Hispanic men as, criminals. If you remember, just a few years ago when President Trump, pretty much called them rapists, etc., etc. So that same discourse from as far back as the 1940s was prevalent even in advertising, which brings me to the core of the issue that I want to discuss, which is we are as marketers, these messages, these brand personification, the way that brands are presented to the public are influenced by us. And despite the fact that we can look back to 1889 and look at advertising and say, wow, I can't believe that they really would have done this then. The fact of the matter is they're still doing it now. So these, for example, are some of the more recent things that we have seen, and some of these you would have kind of heard about or seen. So, the Gucci, Katy Perry, Dove, we have seen these, for example, these Sambo figures. These are shoes that were attached to the Katy Perry brand. And of course, this particular Dove ad was most unfortunate as it featured a product. They're featuring a bath wash where this person took off her shirt, and by the time she got the shirt off, there was a white person. So it was perceived that, washing with Dove can turn you from dark, dirty, undesirable to white, clean, pure. And so these were just some images from some of the more recent campaigns. So what I did as a part of this study, and as I said, it's more of a reflection on where we are, is to kind of track the big controversies that have pretty much happened over the past 10 or so years. And what I saw was that we had where, yes, it used to happen once or twice, but even now we're seeing where there are ebbs and flows. And we had, for example, in 2017, 6 major brands ended up in some sort of issues with minority groups because of advertising. In terms of industries that are the most frequent culprits, the data that I collected indicated that the fashion and beauty industries have been the more frequent ones who have gotten caught in some of these issues, and it normally has to do with advertising messages and in some instances actual product. Now, the groups that are mostly referenced in a way that is considered racist or racially insensitive, majority of the times it would be Black or African Americans, but that is actually followed by the Asian or Asian American population. So those are the two groups that tend to get portrayed in a way that is either negative or considered outright racist or racially insensitive. So the question that I ask is higher education a part of the problem? Are we doing enough to prepare marketers to deal with inherent biases, to deal with self-reference criterion, to deal with ethnocentrism that pervades now their work? Because most times when you hear about these controversial issues, what tends to happen is that persons will say, oh, my Black friends looked at this, or so-and-so looked at this. And the question becomes, how is that enough? And why did we think that that was okay? And then I was like, you know what? Let me just look at the programs. So I started to look at IMC specifically. And I looked at IMC programs across the United States. And as you can see here, I found about 26 universities that offered programs that were either IMC specific or marketing communications programs. And in terms of the regions, the Midwest and Northeast were the larger regions, followed by the Southeast and the West. Now, these were, and this is, of course, both undergraduate and graduate. So if a university offered an undergraduate degree program, they would have been counted. But I'm going to talk a little bit about within those particular areas. So for example, at the undergraduate level, I only found 8 programs that made reference to IMC. And we had 2 programs that were actual IMC or marketing communications degree programs. Only 4 of those programs offered concentrations in IMC. So it's a communications degree, but there is an IMC specialization or IMC major. There was 1 degree program that did not offer a major, but it offered a minor. And there was another program that offered a certificate. Now, in terms of content, what was found is that even though we have seen these IMC programs and these, we don't have as many undergraduate IMC programs as we do graduate, as you will see in my next slide, a cultural, whether diversity, inclusion, multicultural component was not very common. So for example, here, we saw that there was 1 university that offered an elective in ethnographic methods and cultural analysis, and a cultural analysis elective. And it should be noted that this was at Emerson College, which was one of the pioneers in the US in terms of IMC education. Then there in the IMC concentrations that were being offered within bachelor's degree programs at Duquesne University, which is in Pennsylvania, they offer an intercultural communication elective. So as long as the course spoke to culture, I still flagged it. So, and then at Ithaca College, we had where there was a global, intercultural, and multicultural PR course. That was it. Other than that, the only program that had more than one course that was focused on or had students really training in building multicultural competence would be the Hispanic Marketing Communication minor at Florida State University, where the students have to do one required course, which is the Hispanic Marketing course, and then they have to do 3 other courses that focus on language, culture of another country, right? Or even you can look at whether in country or another ethnic group within the US. So that was what, so that is a combination of 4 courses. I was the only offering that actually put together multiple courses to say you can focus on this. Now, at the graduate level, we saw 22 IMC graduate programs, but only 6 of those programs had a multicultural or diversity component. Now, within those 6 programs, 3 offered core courses that look at culture through the international lens. So still looking at, when we examine culture, we're just examining cultures of foreign countries, not necessarily looking at the cultures within the same country that we are operating. And these are the institutions that currently offer any kind of, and like I said, these are more international, so global cultures, international global communication perspectives, international marketing cultures. Only one program that was being offered in IMC had a core course that examined culture through local lenses. And this is at UNC Wilmington, where they currently have a relatively new IMC master's degree. And I believe it's an online program. And they have as a required course for all persons who do the IMC degree program, a diversity, inclusion, and the IMC challenge. That's the name of the module, and that's core. There was only one other institution that offered any kind of content, and this would also be at Florida State University, where they have a program where you can actually specialize on multicultural, and the specialization within the IMC degree program there is intercultural and multicultural marketing communication. And students are required to take 3 courses. There's a Hispanic marketing communication course, a multicultural marketing communication course, and this is a special topics course, international PR. So again, one could argue that, you know, the international PR course doesn't necessarily speak fully to the local context, but this is the offering. And to be honest, this is the best that we have seen, even after all these years, even after all the controversies. So this is where the programs are. So the question or the argument that I have made is that there is a problem with these numbers. These numbers are not, if you look at, for example, if we go back and look at the map of diversity in the US, the states where diversity indices are growing, these numbers would be extremely troubling in terms of a reflection of the populations that are being served and targeted in these areas. And it questions whether or not IMC and marketing education has been responsive to the changes in the population in terms of making sure that students are equipped to actually function effectively in industry. So what is the way forward then for IMC and IMC education? And like I said, this was the first phase of a study. I am currently also looking now at marketing education as a whole. So I've looked at IMC and I'm also looking at marketing degree programs as well. Now, as I said before, there has been discourse that has focused on building multicultural competence and social justice within the higher education space and within the educational context. Now, there has been discussion about, firstly, moving towards more culturally responsive teaching. Culturally responsive teaching focuses on building the learning capacity of the individual student. Now, this particular concept is more common again at the elementary level, because it speaks mostly to, being aware of the cultural, social, and economic context within which students live, and the limitations that it brings to, or challenges that it brings to the educational setting, and then adjusting for that so that each student, each learner is able to benefit from the educational experience. And so you understand that people are not starting from the same place, or their frames of references are different, right? There has also been discussion about multicultural education, which any form of education or teaching that incorporates the histories, texts, values, beliefs, and perspectives from different cultural backgrounds is what is being advocated for. However, given where we are right now and some of the more prevalent things that we've seen within the social justice space, we have also seen where there has been there has been advocacy around social justice education. So building a lens for that student to be able to look at what is happening and see where things are fair or not fair, or where injustice exists. Now, it can be argued that there is an argument for pretty much for this to transcend from not just elementary, but also to make its way into the higher education space, into business schools that teach marketing, and into schools that teach integrated marketing communications. Now, multicultural education is not new. We have seen this as far back as the civil rights movement, when African Americans started to demand that texts and curricula reflect, their experiences, their histories, and their struggles. And we have seen that not just African Americans have done that, but we are seeing where the other ethnic groups are also demanding the same thing as well. Now, according to Banks, who has done quite a bit of work on multicultural education, he considers multicultural education to be an idea that seeks to create educational opportunities for all students, including those from different racial, ethnic, and social class groups. But he also considers it to be a reform movement, which would mean that it is not a desired end state, but a process or something that will continue to happen over time, right? And through that, we should also consider it to be a process, so that as educators, we are setting goals that we are striving to achieve within not just the classroom environment in our individual classrooms, but also within the institutions where we deliver instruction. And the dimensions that have been presented and that have been discussed that I think we could apply within our own within IMC programs is, of course, one, integration of different approaches when we are talking about content related to racial, ethnic, and cultural groups, integrating that into curricula. Also, helping students to understand, investigate, and determine how biases, frames of references, and perspectives within a particular discipline influences the way in which knowledge is constructed within it. And this is, of course, particularly important for us in terms of, as instructors, delivering content that is part of the task. Because again, one of the things that we understand is that persons tend to interpret everything from their own frame of reference. How do we train persons to actually then begin to step out of themselves and one, actually value understanding the other, which could be the consumer, and then two, aiming to think the way they do so that they can communicate effectively with them. And of course, reducing prejudices would definitely be extremely important as a part of that. And so we advocate for an equity pedagogy, which modifies teaching in ways that will facilitate the academic achievement of students from these diverse backgrounds. However, we also have to transform the culture and the organizations of schools in ways that enable that diversity that we are looking for. Because at the end of the day, individual instructors will try to implement this within their classrooms, right? However, at the end of the day, as the data has suggested, program structure is also an issue, because by and large, we have seen where diversity education within our programs is mostly about persons who want to. So it's not necessarily required. It's I can choose this. And what tends to happen is within the classroom, the lecturers, professors are preaching to the choir. So persons from minority groups are more likely to enroll in those programs and choose those electives. But if it is that we're not seeing this reflected at the core, then we are likely to have an issue where, again, the persons who need to know will not know. And so the structure, so it has to also come from not just the instructor within the classroom, but also from the administrative perspective, looking at the curriculum as a whole and saying what actually has to be at the forefront, included in the curriculum at the core, where students can't opt out because of preform biases, perceived importance of particular topics to their overall education, which, as we would have experienced, sometimes it's not necessarily the best to leave it up to the student as to what must be communicated within the program. So what does this look like in IMC? I would have mentioned that we have to consider equity pedagogy, and we have to consider building multicultural intelligence within our classrooms, within our own classes, how we apply this to course content that we deliver. However, as I would have just mentioned, it is much bigger than that. As the data indicates, the programs themselves have to be looked at to understand where are we falling short, and where are we failing the practitioners that we are actually putting out into the world. So with that, I will now open the floor for questions. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Dr. Neleen. Floor is open, guys. This is such an important issue. Floor is open for questions. You know, as Dr. Neleen, as you spoke, I was engrossed in the issues, because right here in our space, in the region and in Jamaica locally, there may be a tendency to feel that, oh, well, we don't have these diversity issues. But we also know that nothing is further from the truth. We have a different set of issues. And as you spoke, I started to go through our programs in my mind, and I realized that I saw something happening even here over the years, because if we look at the very first master's program out of CARIMAC, it looked at issues of gender, class, race, ethnicity. There was this breadth and all of these issues. But as we became more focused on specific areas like IMC, then issues like, race, class, gender, and ethnicity, those became electives. You can do it if you want to. But when you think about what you just shared with us, that advertising is one of the areas where we need practitioners who are sensitive to issues of race, class, gender, and ethnicity. But, you know, Olivia, you can play in here because Olivia is working on reviewing our IMC, you know, and I just think this presentation is so timely because of the issues you mentioned. So I just say that from our perspective. So we have to be sensitive to those very issues that you mentioned here.
Many thanks, Dr. Gordon Bell. In fact, one of the things that I would love to say is that one of the things I've observed is and while we might not necessarily be on the same scale as the US, we have seen in Jamaica an increase in anti-immigrant rhetoric, anti-other rhetoric. So for example, we look at the explosion in Indian-owned stores and in Chinese-owned stores. And generally, we have seen quite hostile reactions. And persons would have, you know, said, oh, why is the government giving special treatment to this group? Or you know, how are we letting in so many of them to come and open businesses? And so it happens in Jamaica. The conversations are happening in Jamaica, and we have always felt like we were safe by saying, out of many one people, no matter what you look like, you're still Jamaican. But the truth is, there are groups being othered, even within our local context.
That is so true. In a class recently, we noted that in the discussion, there was a tendency to talk about the Chinese Jamaican, not even those coming in, but the Jamaicans born here, been here for centuries. We still call them Chinese and Indians. And the Black Jamaican, however, is Jamaican, but we still call the other groups by their, you know, racial identities Chinese. And we spoke about the implications of that in othering, you know, other Jamaicans. So that point is well taken. Colleagues, questions?
And while we get our questions together, the one other thing that I would say is that it's not just the othering, it's also the assumption that aspects of their culture are not retained. When they come, they assimilate, they become Jamaica. So out of many one people, when the truth is there is much more nuance to the conversation. So when you look at, for example, you know, aspects of the cultures still being practiced, people still actively identifying with the cultures from which their, you know, grandparents, great-grandparents immigrated. We cannot really say that Jamaica is just Jamaicans, because while we are Jamaican, we are also, our identities are still, you know, complex.
That's right. That's right. So the larger issue I hear then from this presentation is that our education or curriculum at this level has to include, as a matter of urgency and importance, sensitivity issues and not just. And I know, you know, I can remember points in the development of curriculum here and in other places where the emphasis was on the practical skills and the technical skills, and, you know, anything that dealt with what we're talking about, the tendency to see it as, oh, soft skills. When there's nothing soft about it, it's part of being able to build appropriate and ethical strategies for marketing. Otherwise, people tend to see advertising in particular as a great enemy, because advertising always seems to be offending somebody. There the Cafe Blue story the other day about some Cafe Blue ad, and there are always these issues. So these are not soft skills. You're saying they should be part and parcel of the curriculum, certainly for marketers and especially for communicators, IMC persons who we would expect should come with this as part of their training. Okay, well.
I see some hands up.
Yes, yes.
So
Okay, could we hear Chevy and then Alpha?
Hi, Alpha's hand was up first, so I'll wait.
Okay, go ahead, Alpha.
Thanks, Dr. Leslie, for a wonderful presentation. I find it very, very interesting, the discussion that you're having. You know, it's not surprising that in the void or the vacuum that you have identified that is also relevant to IMC in the Caribbean. Many of our students, naturally, they seek to sync the IMC courses with ESEM, Entertainment, Culture, and Enterprise Management, where they get some level of context. And we have quite a few students in the room, so I would love to hear from them their own perspectives. But they, in the absence of, I mean, we do have courses that touch on culture, you know, that famous course that Professor Agri-Brown taught to most of the graduates, you know, and that Dr. Gordon Bell and Dr. Henderson continue to teach. Very, very important courses, but we find that our students' appetite gets very wet and they go in to seek for other ESEM courses. My question is, do you believe that there should be a greater integration? Because it's almost like we're operating in silos. When they go over ICS, Institute of Caribbean Studies, they learn culture. We here at CARIMAC are talking about media, but we're not necessarily collaborating in the way that we should, speaking from a similar page, you know. What is your own impression as someone who also teaches in the department?
So even without, you know, context from, you know, teaching at UE, I would say that the ability to collaborate with other faculties is one of those ways that you can easily, it's low-hanging fruit. So for example, I know that at Florida State, only one of the courses that the students are required to do for their certification in Hispanic marketing is actually taught in the COM school. They have to go to the Spanish, they have to go to languages department to take a class. They have to go there to take a class. And so what happens there is this, you know, meeting of the minds within those colleges and faculties, discussing kind of, you know, these are our goals. How can we, you know, make it so that our students, you know, get what they also need out of the experience. And so there is certainly an opportunity for collaboration, even if we are not offering the content within our own school.
All right, so I see time is running away, so I'll just get to it quickly. Hi everyone, Chevani Shevas White. I teach animation at CARIMAC, and I'm obviously sitting in for one of our CARIMAC staff called Tanis Ennis, because she's always pushing for inclusivity as well. And in film and animation, one of the hot topics for the last 5 years, it's not just diversity, it's also inclusivity, right? And one of the things that I find that I have to be now teaching my own students is you need to ensure that you have those subtitles in your production. It's not enough to just create the video now. So same thing with advertisements, you know, it shouldn't be that they're creating the ads and it's just this video and they leave it at that. That's not the direction where we're going anymore. We need to ensure that we include everyone as much as we can, because again, as you rightly stated, Dr. Piper, these companies are missing out on opportunities if they isolate or disregard a certain population. So it's not just, oh, you are this color skin and you are from this location. It can also be the disabilities that you have as well. So it's not really a question. I just wanted to make a quick statement on diversity and inclusivity. That's it from me.
Thanks for that, Chevy, and I'm sure we all agree with that, I think, especially in animation, we find that, that is also an area where diversity and inclusivity, we see the need for that and for practitioners to be sensitive to those concerns. Well, this was a very good discussion. Thank you again, Dr. Leslie Piper, for your contribution and your presentation, and it really is timely. It is so timely. Well, we have almost come to the end of the session. If there are no further questions or comments, I want to express gratitude on behalf of all of us here at CARIMAC to our presenter. It's very timely and important discussion. And also to all of you who have made the time to be here, to be part of the session and to make it another productive one. Next Wednesday, we're going to be having the follow-up presentation to last week's session led by Mona Office for Research and Innovation. We will be hearing from Dr. Marcus Goff of the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office, JIPO, alongside a representative from the campus legal office as they take us into the matter of intellectual property as it relates to monetizing media and communication products. And we're looking forward to that. Just a reminder that we here at CARIMAC offer undergraduate programs in animation, digital media production, film production, integrated marketing communication, and journalism. We also offer master's degree programs in communication for social and behavior change, communication studies, integrated marketing communication, and media management. There is also our MPhil PhD program in communication studies. You can visit our website for details, https I think you might see it on the screen. Is it there? carimac.com/programs. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Have a great evening. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you next week.